Let's start with the NFC Championship, 3 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be snowy and cold, according to the forecast. Packers hosting the Bucs. What are you looking for in this one? We'll dive in deep in the rematch.
Yeah, first NFC Championship game that Aaron Rodgers has ever hosted.
That is crazy.
Right?
Right, yeah.
Been to a few of them. First one he's actually hosted. And the snow, the cold, Green Bay, actual potential home field advantage in this year of no home field advantage. It's effectively eradicated this season over between COVID and no fans in the stands and everything else. This might actually be a legitimate one. There'll be presumably some fans there. There'll be cold, there'll be snow. This is an actual potential home field advantage, especially for or against a team like Tampa Bay. Warm weather, Tom Brady doesn't like the cold. Now he's going to go back there and
Florida
experience it again. Yeah.
Is he a Florida man? Look, we basically live in the South now. We're in Cincinnati, but we're like right on the border with Kentucky. And it gets pretty hot here. And when it's become 30 degrees out there in the last few weeks, like I'm from New England. Normally 30 degrees shouldn't be a big issue for me, but it kind of feels a lot colder. It feels like it's 10 degrees out there. So my body is acclimated to this northern Kentucky weather here, Sam. I wonder how much that's happened with Brady, who's going to probably be rocking his scuba suit. That's what he wears, when it's really cold. Throws the scuba suit on there.
Yeah.
Is he going to be giving advice to the warm weather folks?
Everyone scuba up.
Like Devin White. Devin White played at LSU. Now he's a Buck. He's not ready for the 20-degree weather, is he?
So the way, quarterbacks buy their offensive linemen like scooters and stuff. Brady's just going to buy everyone a scuba suit.
Scuba suit.
Scuba suits for everybody for the NFC Championship game.
With a TB12 label on it.
What's your size?
Anyway, I'm looking forward to this game. I think the big question, Aaron Rodgers answered it this week. How much does the first matchup matter? 38-10. And it wasn't just 38-10. It was 10-0 Packers. Yeah. And then the Bucs went on a 38-0 run, of course. Do that math. And everything just looked different, right? Aaron Rodgers, I don't want to say imploded, but he just looked rattled, right? He just doesn't get rattled that often. So I can't expect that to happen again. But Rodgers said this week on the Pat McAfee show, how much does that matter? About as much as it matters that the Saints crushed the Bucs at their place, halfway through the season. So my question for you, does that previous game matter at all as we head into the championship game?
It matters to the extent that we've seen that happen between these two teams before. There is, in the spectrum of possible outcomes of what could happen, we at least know that that's on the table, right? There is a scenario by which Aaron Rodgers does implode, throws a bunch of turnover-worthy plays, gets into it with Ndamukong Suh, kind of loses himself, can't deal with the blitz, and the whole thing goes away from Green Bay. We know that that's an option. But because it's happened once before, it's probably not going to happen again. Even at the time, that game was so weird in terms of the 10-0 and then swing all the way the other way. It felt like at the time, this is a game where everything is just going the wrong way for Green Bay. And that those games when they happen, there's basically nothing you can do, nothing you can do at the time, but also you can't really take anything from them. They don't happen every time. They're just weird confluences of events that all happen at the same time, and you kind of throw them out. And it felt at the time, all right, that was a weird game. It was bad. It looked awful for Green Bay, but you probably have to throw that out in terms of what they're doing this season. That wasn't them. This was just something that happened that day. The thing, though, that was interesting was that argument he got into with Ndamukong Suh, right?
Yep.
Because Suh is like that as a player in terms of antagonistic, plays on the edge of dirty. He's had some, and he stepped over that line in the past multiple times. But he got into it with Aaron Rodgers, and usually I think when people start to sort of trash talk with Rodgers, he likes it. It's fun for him, and he plays better and just lights them up, right? Something about the Suh thing, it went the other way, and it got in his head, and he became obsessed with that argument rather than figuring out where the blitz was coming from and how to defeat it. And it sort of distracted him and caused him issues, and that became the story of that game. Suh's going to be the same guy, right? He's not going away. So if you haven't figured out how to tune that out and not pay attention to what Suh's doing and essentially ignore him, there is a potential that Suh can get in Rodgers' head again and cause him some issues.
A couple numbers to just sum up what we saw in that Week 6 matchup. Aaron Rodgers, completion percentage of 46%. That was his worst since Week 15 of 2014. And again, that was the year where Rodgers was MVP. He was spectacular. He was almost perfect throughout the season until that one game against Buffalo late in the season. That was also his lowest passer rating, 35.4, lowest passer rating since that 2014 Buffalo game. It was his lowest yards per attempt since week 10 of 2019. Turnover-worthy plays, he had 3, tied for most of the season. Of course, he had a pick 6, and Rodgers only has like 3 pick 6s in his entire career. Not only does he take care of the ball, but he takes care of the ball and does give the defense opportunities to return it. The story was that the Bucs figured out the Packers, right? They blitzed 50% of the time, highest blitz percentage that the Packers have seen all year. They sacked him 3 times on the blitz. Rodgers has only been sacked 1 other time on the blitz. So everything about this game does kind of feel like a one-off, right? Like an anomaly. So do the Bucs go in and say, all right, we gotta roll with the same game plan here? Because usually when you face a Rodgers level quarterback, you can't just go with an expected game plan because they have answers. The Packers have the ability to answer these questions.
But yeah, and the other thing is that even with that game included, Rodgers is really good at the stuff that worked.
Yeah.
So even if you were looking at it and saying, well, last time we did this, generally that is not the game plan to beat Aaron Rodgers. Like even including that game, Rodgers against the blitz this season is a top 10 quarterback. You take that game out, PFF bingo, Rodgers is the best rated quarterback in the NFL against the blitz, right? He's ahead of Baker Mayfield, ahead of Drew Brees, ahead of Mahomes. He's the best graded quarterback in the NFL this season against the blitz, that game aside. And even if you include that game where he was a train wreck, he's still a top 10 graded quarterback against the blitz. So like if you were coming into this week without the knowledge of what happened the last time, you would say, well, dialing up the blitz is not the way to attack Aaron Rodgers. Clearly he carves it up. He's too dangerous to do that. But you now have the evidence of saying that, well, if we blitzed him 50% of the time, it did work. I think a part of it was they were dialing up the blitz in a very specific way a lot of the time. They were kind of attacking the motion that Green Bay had and blitzing off that. And again, this is week 6, right? And week 6 of, I don't want to say it's a new offense because obviously Matt LaFleur was there last year, but it's all the things they're doing this year in terms of pre-snap motion and a lot of those sort of bunch formations and all the things we talked about previously in terms of free, easy, schematic wins to help receivers out, right? Like the Jalen Ramsey play. So instead of just being one-on-one, Devontae Adams against Jalen Ramsey, you put Adams in motion, you scheme him up, you get him free, right? You buy him an easy play that he doesn't have to win one-on-one. Same with Aaron Rodgers. All of those things are kind of new this year. They weren't doing a lot of them last year. So the first time they met, it was 6 weeks into doing this. Now, obviously, they're, 18 weeks into doing this. They should have better answers even if a team decides to attack them the same way and essentially blitz off that motion the way they did in week 6.
Yeah, and the answer is, I think, Devontae Adams, the guy that has a passer rating of 140 in single coverage, 5.3 yards per route in single coverage. The Bucs game plan last week was, all right, Drew Brees torched us against zone the first time around. So it's funny because the Bucs are going from a game planning against the team that kind of had their number, and they had to make adjustments, right? So they're like, we can't do the same thing we did in week 9 against the Saints. We have to completely change. We got to play more press man. We have to get up there and be more aggressive defensively. They're in a spot now. It's kind of like the end of the game where do you stay aggressive or do you play soft coverage when you're in control of the game where it feels like you've had success already? The Bucs have to figure out, do we roll with the same game plan defensively? And if we do, knowing they've prepped for this, or how much are we going to mix it up? How much are we going to play softer zone? And what is the answer going to be for the Bucs covering Devontae Adams? With Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis on the outside, guys who have battled injuries this year, Sean Murphy-Bunting, what do they do to slow down Devontae Adams? Because even though the Packers do have other options with Alan Lazard and Bob Tunyon and all that, it's still going to come down to big game. Rodgers is going to his guy, Devontae Adams, who's been just so dominant this entire season.
Yeah, the Tampa Bay defensive game plan, particularly in the secondary, is an interesting conundrum because we've said for a while that I think that group of defensive backs is best when you let them get physical and aggressive at the line of scrimmage and play more man coverage. But you now have to do that against Devontae Adams.
Right.
And if you miss, like one missed jam at the line, he's 5 yards open. It's a slant that's going to the house. Like, he is extremely dangerous against that kind of stuff. It's probably the last thing you want to do against him specifically, but it is probably what they do best. The other thing is, like, Tampa Bay has now looked really good for a period of time, but let's not forget just how important the sort of the game flow of last week was in that how that game panned out, right? The turnovers from the Saints essentially gave the ball to the Bucs, right? They put them in good field position time after time after time, let them build this lead, and then they're in business. But like, if that doesn't happen this week, if the Packers, instead of turning the ball over and giving them free plays and free scores, if they actually get out to their own hot start and put up the same double-digit point lead that they had the first time around, like, that's a much more challenging place for this Bucs team to be, chasing a game, having to execute well on offense, needing Tom Brady to have a clean game, not a 3 turnover-worthy play game like last week. Like, Green Bay, I think, can put the Bucs under a lot of pressure quickly in a way the Saints weren't able to do.
Yeah, look, I think both sides, it's going to be fantastic. I think staying on the Bucs defensive side, I think the linebackers were active. Devin White, Levante David. Even though it's funny because linebackers are one of those positions where, like, I think you only remember the great plays, and Devin White's made a ton of them this year. He's also been out of position for a lot. He's been attacked in coverage at times. Those guys fly around the field. I think they're going to be key against the backs out of the backfield, because the Packers like to throw to Aaron Jones. They like to throw to their backs, and whatever the Packers try to do from a run game perspective. That's the other component here. Todd Bowles' Bucs defenses have been excellent against the run, for whatever that's worth. And the last time the Packers played in the snow, what did they do? They unleashed A.J. Dillon. It was A.J. Dillon time in the snow. And Aaron Rodgers played a great game against the Titans.
Is it too late to nickname him the Snowplow? Can we get that started?
I think he earns it if he rushes for 100 this weekend.
Okay.
So that'll be interesting as well too, because we always talk about, look, it's balance on offense is just attacking what the defense is giving you, right? The Bucs defense stops the run extremely well. I think the Packers would make a mistake if they're like, well, it's snow time, bring out A.J. Dillon, run, pass. I think that would be a mistake, even though it worked against the Titans pretty well on that Sunday night game in the snow. But just keep an eye on that, because the Bucs, that's strength against strength if they do try to attack from a run game perspective.
Particularly if Vita Vea returning is anything like the Vita Vea that got injured before he went down. Like, he was playing like at an all-pro level for the first 5 weeks of the season before he broke his ankle.
He got hurt in the Packers game.
Yeah, so 5 weeks. There early. Yeah. Week 6 he went down, but he was playing at like an all-pro level at the point that he went down. If he's returned at that level, that guy in the middle immediately shores up an awful lot on what was already a good defensive front.
Vita Vea was fantastic before going down to injury. He had a 90.1 grade, only played 224 snaps so far this season, but maybe it was a hurt just before the Packers game. He's only played in 5 games. Did he play? No, he got hurt before the Packers game. So they did that without him. But yeah, he's great against the run, and he can push the pocket just a little bit, right? So he's supposed to come off injured reserve. I don't know if you're expecting him for 50 snaps a game, but even if it's a good 20 to 30 snaps that he can contribute here, that's extremely valuable as well. So,
yeah.
So what else are you expecting here, Packers offense-wise? I mean, I think, well, let's talk Rodgers. We've talked a little bit about the legacy stuff and all that. It's his first time hosting an NFC Championship game. He has only been to 1 Super Bowl. Hasn't been to a Super Bowl since the 2010 season. It just feels like, with all that's happened, he is just in the zone this year. I'm expecting him to come out and play well, right?
Yeah. I mean, Rodgers he's essentially been pretty phenomenal all season long outside of that Bucs game. Like, Deshaun Watson hasn't had a bad game, didn't have a bad game all season long. Went the full 16 regular season games without a stinker in there. Aaron Rodgers had the stinker, but it was one. And he had that one game that was just a nightmare. It happened to be against this team that he's repeating against, but outside of that, his baseline was the highest of any quarterback in the league. So I don't see any reason that would repeat. I mean, we said it felt at the time like a kind of freak game where everything was going south. I don't think it's going to happen the same way, at which point, you have to like A, Green Bay, and B, Aaron Rodgers' ability to do the same thing against this defense that he's done against every other defense.
Now let's go to the other side of the ball. Bucks, Brady, passing offense again are going to be key. My question is, game plan wise, we talked about this on Monday's show. They ran the ball like crazy on early downs, and even though Leonard Fournette looks a tick better than he has in the past from a vision and quickness standpoint, I don't think Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones are winning this game for the Bucks. So I thought that last week there might be an issue with, okay, it's Bruce Arians' coaching history versus Sean Payton's coaching history. Bruce Arians is the type of guy, emotional game. He's going to, throw the red flag at a time he's not supposed to, just off emotion. He might see the snowflakes and, decide we definitely can't throw the ball here. Like, that's what I wanted. Like, do they completely, take the ball out of Brady's hands, which essentially they did. And did they do that last week because they hadn't had success throwing the ball against a really good Saints secondary? Or is it just the playoff strategy of the Bucs when they, start to get further into the closer to the Super Bowl?
I think it's just what Bruce Arians does. Like that's just his offense, right?
But it seemed like they had done a better job after the bye and down the stretch, throwing the ball on early downs, running more play action, running more stuff that Brady was comfortable with.
Yeah, but here's the other thing is that while generally it's a bad thing for an offense to do to run the ball in 1st and 10 because runs are just less efficient and you typically are putting your quarterback in a tougher spot on 2nd and more importantly 3rd down. But the Bucs have like the highest average depth of target in the NFL. Their offense is built to pick up 10 to 15 yards in a chunk. That's what they're targeting essentially every pass attempt anyway. So whereas there are other offenses out there where when they're facing 3rd and 12, it's like a catastrophe. They almost don't have a play in there to pick up 3rd and 12. Like everything the Bucs do is designed to pick up 3rd and 12 anyway. So I think they're actually unusually well suited to do what it is they're doing in terms of hamstringing themselves on 3rd down. Now where it becomes interesting is like if it is bad weather and the snow actually affects the passing game, it also probably disproportionately affects the Tampa Bay passing game more than any other one because they do have one of the highest average depths of target in the NFL. They're top? Yeah. Only Jalen Hurts has a higher average depth of target for the entirety of the season.
Yeah, I think Drew Lock was in the mix. I mean, it's
right,
Brady and a couple other guys with smaller samples. Yep.
Yeah, Brady's number 1 minus Jalen Hurts. So they have like the highest average depth of target in the NFL. So the ball is traveling further in the air longer than any other quarterback in the league. If it's tough to throw because the weather's bad, like it hurts them more than it hurts other teams. So suddenly now they're reduced to like running the ball a lot and trying to warp the offense to a more, Brady-centric short area, higher percentage play. And if you're trying to do that on the fly in the NFC Championship game, it feels like a tricky thing to execute.
Last week that's what felt like was missing. The Bucs didn't have any rhythm offensively early on. They had a 3rd and 3 where they throw it down the field, a 3rd and 1 where they throw it down the field, and it's like, guys, let Brady, on 3rd and 3, let him throw a quick out, let him throw a 3-yard out, and it's not like you don't have the receivers to get open in that area. You've got Chris Godwin, and when Antonio Brown is healthy, he can certainly do that too. Plus, you get the tight ends. By the way, Cameron Brate's been like the most effective receiver out of all these guys, and I think that's what makes the Bucs so dangerous offensively. All these guys that they have to throw to. Antonio Brown's dealing with a knee injury, but even if he's out, we had Tyler Johnson come in making a great play on the back shoulder. I think they should be using Scotty Miller even more. They didn't unleash Scotty Miller until late in the game, and before you know it, he's always in the mix making a big play, 31-yarder that flipped the field for the Bucs. So they have answers everywhere. Mike Evans did get shut down by Jair Alexander the same way he got shut down by Marshawn Lattimore essentially this entire season. So that'll be interesting as well because he's been a key to the offensive resurgence down in the second half of the season as well.
I love it when the data says what you want it to say and backs up the point you're trying to make.
What'd you find?
On 3rd and 11 plus, so 3rd and long for the entirety of the season, including the playoffs, Tom Brady has the 2nd highest yards per attempt figure. Only Matthew Stafford has a better yards per attempt figure than Tom Brady. He has completed 22 of 29 pass attempts on 3rd and long. So essentially, all that running that the Bucs do on first down. For any other team,
that's unsustainable, man.
Of course it's unsustainable.
That's the problem.
But my point is, in this offense, this is what they're designed to do. The way that offense is set up, the things that they do generally, just out of the box as a cookie cutter, here's the play we're running, it's designed to attack that stuff. Like, that is where they live anyway. So when you're putting yourself in a more disadvantageous position in abstract terms, it's not hurting this offense as much as it would hurt, pick a team that's crappy at it. Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a better quarterback, you can get away with 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 11 more often. But this is the same thing we've criticized Seattle for, for years, which is like, you can't just go run, pass, Russ, bail us out on third down. It runs out at some point. Brady's not going to bail you out of third down every single time.
But for example, Russell Wilson has a grade of 44 and a yards per attempt figure like half as much.
Yeah, because they... it regressed at some point after years of being great.
But also, that passing attack isn't designed like that. Like, that passing attack is not consistently there to just target 15 yards downfield. They don't have the same hyper-aggressive, deep... Like, this is Bruce Arians' scheme, right? This is what everybody talks about. It's the highest average depth of target in the league. They go deep downfield. That's why everybody has 40 turnover-worthy plays in year one, because you're just flinging the ball into deep coverage.
Yeah.
But the point is, if you're good at that, and Brady, 40 turnover-worthy plays for everybody else in year one, 12 for Brady. So Brady is good at that. If you're good at that, you're not hurt as much as other teams when you're running the ball into a brick wall and facing 3rd and 10.
So the first time these guys played, the Bucs offense wasn't on the field very much at all. I mean, it was really the Packers controlled the clock, so to speak, but there was the pick six. There was some short fields that the Bucs took advantage of. Brady did throw the ball pretty efficiently, but they didn't need him a ton. The other factor here, as much as we like to diminish the run game, the Packers are one of those teams, as we say, we'll talk about the Bills-Chiefs game, the Packers like to invite the run. They're encouraging you to run the ball, which is what the Saints did last week. So are the Packers going to invite the Bucs to run the ball again? Probably. Will the Bucs take the bait? I expect it to. And if you're going to run the ball, Fournette and Ronald Jones, I think you have to at least average 4.5, 5 yards per carry to be efficient and make things a little bit easier. At the same time, Brady is also one of the more efficient quarterbacks against light boxes, against 6 guys in the box. He's averaging 7 yards per attempt, which is better than you normally would running the ball. So I think the Bucs have to dictate things offensively and find that balance.
The one other thing that I think has a shot to be an issue in this game, or a significant factor that we should talk about, is earlier in the season, the Bucs lost Ali Marpet at left guard, and the replacement was a catastrophe, right? Joe Haig allowed 7 total pressures in the first start, which was the same amount as Marpet had allowed in like 7 weeks before that. And that switch alone was bad enough to essentially ruin the game. That game. And then after that game, it was like, well, we can't start Joe Haig anymore. We've got to make shuffles on the offensive line. Jensen's going to go out to guard. Shipley, was that who came in at center? And we're going to...
Before he retired.
Right.
Yeah.
We're going to move things around and make 2 positions worse, right? So basically losing Marpet honestly was responsible for a lot of their like mid-season issues. Marpet's back, but they lost right guard Alex Kappa, and Aaron Stinney was the guy that came in and played 72 snaps. Played okay, but does that happen 2 weeks in a row? Like, can he still play okay the second time of asking, or does the fact that he's Aaron Stinney and therefore a weak link probably come back to bite them at this point? And if it does, like, can it be like Kenny Clark he suddenly has to deal with, right? Or Zadarius Smith moving inside on passing downs? This is a tall ask for a guy who, doesn't exactly have a ton of pedigree. It's 2018 undrafted free agent. Can he hold up, or does he have a Joe Haig potential to derail this thing all by himself?
116 career snaps for Stinney, 70 of which came last week against New Orleans.
Yes.
And, he gave up a few pressures, had a penalty in there. So expectations aren't extremely high for Stinney. And, I think those matchups could be difficult. The other matchup to keep an eye on, Rashaan Gary, the guy, remember Draft Time, podcast meme guy. Got to go back to our draft takes. We said, look, he's probably not a first-round caliber player based off production, but he certainly is based off of tools. Rashaan Gary, since week 16, got to do this small sample size stuff. Since week 16, since the snow game against Tennessee, the highest-rated edge defender in the NFL. That's Rashaan Gary right now. It's a 3-game sample size. But given his history of freak 280-pound athlete who has everything you're looking for from an athleticism standpoint, who never really put it together from a production standpoint, outside of a few plays. He had some splash plays at Michigan. Below average grading for the first, 80% of his career, year plus. Last 3 weeks, he's been awesome. So I think with a guy like that, do you say, did he flip a switch and tap into his potential, or is it just a random 3-game run? But keep an eye on Rashaan Gary, and then Tristan Worfs, the right tackle. He's been the best pass blocking offensive tackle among rookies, one of the better rookies, in the NFL. And that's been huge. Like going back to draft time again, the Bucs drafted for need, the thing we hate, right?
Yeah.
They said, we need help at safety and we need a starting right tackle. But they got value players there. Tristan Worfs at tackle, Antoine Winfield second round at safety. Both players have been instrumental in their success this year. So I think from a draft standpoint, the Bucs nailed it with Worfs, nailed it with Winfield, and it did fit with what they needed to do in the short term as well.
Yeah, it's always fun when a team does draft for need and actually gets it right. We desperately need to plug this one specific hole with this player in the first round, and then they nail it. And part of it is, that's great. That fixes a lot of things. And then the other side of that is it potentially reinforces some really bad behavior. It's kind of like it's like training a puppy, Steve, that I'm dealing with right now. You don't want to reward it at the wrong time, because then you reinforce the bad behavior. Yeah. So you don't want to reward bad process by hitting a Tristan Worfs pick out of the park, because then all of a sudden you're going to do that every year, right? We're just rolling the draft for one massive glaring hole we need to plug in the first round and rely on our ability to do that every time. It's not good.
I love that you've evolved from rugby analogies to puppy analogies.
Puppy analogies.
Yeah, that's good.
It's all about whatever's in your head at the time.
It just shows where you are in life right now.
Buried under a mound of hell.
The off-air conversations that we have comparing your puppy training to my child training, it's
training.
great. That's what it is, right? We're training children.
Yeah, I just think I'm not sure it's as...
It's called raising them,
right?
Usually,
I'm not sure it's as acceptable a term to use.
The reality is training them.
For your kids.
You're training them how to be humans.
Everyone accepts that, you train a puppy. I'm not sure people accept the term training for kids.
All right, the one last thing I want to mention about this game, the Packers secondary. And I think I mentioned it last week with the Rams. If you're going to attack someone, it's Kevin King, 55.3 regular season grade. He struggles in their zone concepts. I think, the good route runners can handle him pretty well. I'd be interested if the Packers try to match him up with Mike Evans a little bit more. Evans is more of a vertical threat, and King can handle vertical threats a little bit better. But if you get Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, if he plays, or any of the other Bucs receivers on Kevin King, I think it's an advantage. And then you could pair him to Jair Alexander on the other side, one of the better corners in the entire NFL. And then the one last thing, the Packers doing a great job in that intermediate middle of the field with Darnell Savage, with Adrian Amos, a place that Brady loves to attack. The Packers are going to force those outside the numbers types of throws. I really think the Bucs offense is going to come down to the same thing all year. Brady needs to make 4 or 5 big-time throws in this one.
Well, yeah, he does, and he always does. The critical thing, I think, for them is the other side of that ledger. It's he needs to not make the bad throw.
Yeah.
Like that, I think, is the real key. He matched Drew Brees for turnover-worthy plays last week.
One was
right?
the dropped fumble, which wasn't really.
Sure, but matched Drew Brees for putting the ball in harm's way, but had the benefit of his team making the takeaways and putting him in favorable positions. Plus, he actually offset them with some big throws that Drew Brees didn't, right? Brees had nothing. Brady can't have that kind of game against Green Bay. The Packers are too good. If he has 3 turnover-worthy plays again, the Bucs don't win the game. They unless he has some absurd volume of big plays. These two teams, though, overall, in terms of our data, are really evenly matched. Overall PFF ELO rankings, it's number 3 versus number 4. Offense, it's number 1 versus number 2. Defense, it's number 2 versus number 5. They come down really
Bucs,
similarly.
Number 2, by the way.
Yes.
And Packers 5.
But remember, Green Bay's defense has been playing better recently.
Right.
So it's Bucs have a slight edge there, but the Packers, in terms of recency bias, are a lot closer than that. So these, the data says this is pretty razor thin.
So it's Bucs. Packers by 3 is where the market is right now. We have a slight edge for the Packers here. I don't know how much the weather is going to be. Let's wrap it up with this before we make picks. You talked about Brady's legacy and the whole thing. We talked Rodgers' legacy. You mentioned Brady's legacy. This puts him into like Michael Jordan plus type of territory, right? If he can not just get to the Super Bowl, but of course win one. What are you expecting from Brady just from a performance standpoint this weekend?
I think we'll probably get good Tom Brady. I think everyone came out of last week saying that it looked like two 40-plus-year-old quarterbacks slugging it out.
Absolutely
and I don't think it did. I think Brady had a bad game, which hadn't happened for a while, right? The turnover-worthy plays. Brady hadn't done that for a long time. So when it shows up, Brady, this season generally, Brady has timed his ugly performances for bad times in terms of all the eyes on him, prime time, right?
Yep.
He's had his worst games when the lights are on him, which, you know, if you're a narrative guy, you'd be like, well, this is Kirk Cousins, can't play on the big time. But it's Tom Brady. That's probably not true based off his previous career history, right? At which point you probably just have to say he's been unlucky to have his worst games when everybody is watching. But my point is there's now a significant chunk of people that think that Brady is just a lot worse than he actually is because he's had bad games when everybody's watching.
Top 2 graded quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers number 1, Brady number 2. They've played each other 2 other times in their history. That's it. Well, 3 other times, including this year. So it's 2014 Patriots-Packers, 2018 Patriots-Packers, and then the matchup earlier this year.
This is the Super Bowl that you've been wanting for like 15 years.
I picked Patriots-Packers Super Bowl for at least 10 straight years.
Yes.
And was never right.
You're not getting it,
This
but
is
you
it.
might get
This is it.
You're getting it in the NFC Championship.
I was really picking Brady Rodgers, right? But the 2014 game is the game I'm kind of expecting. And what happened there was Rodgers was pristine. Brady was excellent, but like just a slightly worse. And I'm not saying that's exactly I just think both quarterbacks are going to play well. I think it's going to be one of those legendary types of matchups in the snow. It's going to be memorable. I'm leaning Packers here to win. I think they're the better all-around team, and I think they're going to bounce back from that demoralizing 38-10 loss. Where are you going?
Yeah, the more I talk it out, the more I think Green Bay are the team to be picking. I think they're it's a cleaner team. And I know that last game happened, and it happened, you know, it was a huge win for Tampa Bay. But as I say, at the time it felt weird. Once you have that on tape for both teams to go back and analyze what went wrong, it feels very unlikely that the same thing is going to happen for Green Bay, at which point I just don't know that Tampa Bay are able to match them.
One last thing, we had a YouTube commenter say you've been talking about the Bucs having answers a lot, and he didn't know what you meant specifically by that. What did you mean by that? Down the stretch, the Bucs have more answers now than they did earlier in the season.
One of their biggest issues earlier in the year was when teams were able to pressure them or cause problems with their protections by the blitz. So either winning one-on-one matchups with the offensive linemen or causing breakdowns in the protection packages that they had, regardless of how many people were into block. The Bucs, because of that Bruce Arians offense and deep down the field and Tom Brady being new to it, they didn't know where to go with the ball, right? So when Brady got pressured, it was a problem because all he had was either chuck it up deep and hope it comes down, which is usually not something he's going to do, or try and dump it off to a running back in the flat who's going to get buried. There's nowhere to go. They didn't have a good system of hot routes or hot reads. They didn't have sensible places to go with the football. So when pressure came, it was a much bigger problem. Since that point, they have started to develop answers. They've also gotten better with their protections. Like they understand better. Brady understands better how to call the protections in this offense to actually neutralize some of these blitzes. But now they've actually started to develop hot reads, right? Mike Evans, the Godwin, they receivers have patterns specifically designed for Brady to have an outlet that isn't a check down to a running back or a prayer deep down the field. They have the parts of the offense has modified towards figuring out that flaw that they had earlier in the season.
So much on the line in this one, Packers-Bucs. That's the first game